Hello, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. Today's lesson is a very exciting lesson because we're going to start working on our MockStore web application that we had talked about in the introductory lesson. And in order to do that, we're also going to learn about the topic of include statements. So, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about, as mentioned, include statements, something known as the include path. We're going to talk about the importance of code reuse, which is an extremely important topic. Something known as require statements, and then as often we do, we're going to talk about coding conventions as it relates to include and require statements, and then finally the exciting part is we're going to get into our introduction to our web application. So what is an include statement? Well, essentially an include statement is a statement in your PHP code that allows you to include the contents of one PHP file within another, and the included file is often referred to as the included file. Now the included file is treated as PHP code, and it gets executed accordingly, and any variables that you define in your PHP code and your main PHP script prior to an include statement are available in the include file, and any variables that you define in the included file are also available in the rest of the main PHP script, and we'll see a little more of that in a second. One thing to note is that when PHP reaches an include statement, which looks like these two down here, these two statements, it goes and fetches that file and it starts processing it. And when it processes it, it enters in HTML mode, just like it does when it starts beginning to process a PHP file. It assumes that everything is not PHP code. So in order for you to include PHP code in an include file, you have to properly delimit the code with the PHP opening and closing tags. Now in PHP there are two syntaxes for the include statement. The first one here is doesn't make use of parentheses, and the second one here makes use of parentheses. They both function the same exact way, and in this course we're going to be using the one without the parentheses. So let's take a look at what we might use an include file for. We have a page here called includeexample.html, and it's a simple HTML page with a content section. And what we can do is sort of subdivide this into a header section, a footer section, and a content section. And what we can do is take the beginning information, or the header section of the web page, and separate it out into a separate file. So in this case it's called header.html. So what we've done is we've taken the beginning of this file out and we're going to place it in a separate file here. Then what we're also going to do is take out the footer section, or the end section of the web page, and we're going to include it in a file called footer.html. Now what that's going to allow us to do is, if we rename includeexample.html to includeexample.php and make use of include statements, we can get the same web page. So what we've done here is we have a PHP file, and it starts off with the line include header.html. And what that's going to do is, when it reaches this line of code, it's going to go out, find header.html, and include that and process this content just as if it were already in this file to begin with. Then it's going to, after it finishes the inclusion, it's going to go ahead and continue processing. This is just straight HTML, which it passes on to output, and then it's going to reach another PHP tag section with another include file. And what that's going to do is go and include the footer.html file, which simply contains HTML. So PHP is going to process this file, and since it's just HTML, it's simply going to output it. So by the time we get to the end of the file, we have the same file as here before, except it's sort of spread out in different parts over 3 different files. And what that allows us to do, as you'll see, is it allows us to sort of create a template, in that we can simply have a page. For each page we have it look like this, with this sort of template, and every page can have the same header and the same footer, and all that differentiates is different from one page to the next is the actual content. So what that means is that we can go ahead and change something in, let's say, the header file. For example, maybe we have a logo at the top of the page. We can change that in just the one include file, and it's going to update all of the pages. So if we actually go and take a look at, this is lecture 8, and if we go and take a look at includeexample.html, this is what the file looks like. It's got a simple content goes here header. And if we blow this up, this is what the source code looks like. Now if we go back and we look at includeexample.php, which is the one with the include statements, what we should find is that it prints out the same HTML. And if we actually go and look at the source code, the source is actually the same as well. So here you can see the only difference being that in this one I've changed the title to .php because it's a different file name. But basically what's happened is in this file, PHP has inserted the contents of header.html at the beginning. It inserted the content that was in the main file, which was include test.php, and then it output the footer information, and the information was contained in footer.html. So as you see, it has the desired effect of creating the same web page. So you may have noticed that in the include statement, it is an include, and then it has the statement begins with the word include, and then a file name specified in between parentheses, or excuse me, in between quotes. And what that does is that tells PHP which file to include. One thing to note is that the file name specified, it can actually have a absolute or relative path preceding the file name. And what that does is that tells PHP exactly where the file is located on your computers or on your web server, so that it'll know where to find the file. Now if a path is specified, then PHP is going to go and look at the exact location you specified, whether it's through an absolute path or a relative path. And if it can't find the file, it's going to issue a warning at that include statement, but then it's going to continue processing the rest of the file. The other alternative is if a path is not specified, which if we look at our example, we didn't specify a path, we just have the file name. Because it resides in the same directory, we actually could have done ./, which means the current directory, and that would have been a relative path. So if a path is not specified, PHP searches for the file in locations specified by the include path directive in php.ini. And we talked a little bit about php.ini file in a previous lesson, and basically that's the main configuration file for PHP. There's a directive in there called include path, and it lists all the directories when you use an include statement that PHP should search for, should search to find the files it's looking for. If it can't find the file in those directories specified by include path, then it finally looks in the running script's current directory, which is what happened in our case, and loads the file. Now if it can't find the file in any of those locations, it does the same thing as if a path were specified. It's going to issue a warning and that the file can be found, and then it's going to continue to process the script. So as you can see here, we had used the just used the file name for our include. So we used header.html. So what happened was when PHP went to process this, because no path was specified, it went to the include path directive. It searched all the directories in there for this file, and if it couldn't find it in there, it looked in the current directory, which is where it was. It resided in the same directory as includeexample.php. So code reuse. One of the great things about using include files is it facilitates a programming concept known as code reuse, which is extremely important. And basically what that allows you to do is it allows you to place redundant or common HTML or PHP code in separate include files and then include them in as many pages as needed. So what that does is that allows you to put the same content that's in maybe 5 different pages all in one file. So in order to update all the different pages, you only update one file. Now that's great because it increases your efficiency, because instead of, let's say you wanted to change the maybe a link in the header section of a web page, instead of having to go up and manually update the HTML for maybe 5 different files, you simply update it in the include file, and if the include file is included in all those pages, they automatically receive the update. The other thing, so it reduces the amount of time it takes to update your website. The other advantage it has is it's going to reduce the number of opportunities for errors to occur, because let's say you have to go and update the link in 5 different files. That gives you 5 opportunities to maybe misspell. Maybe it's a really long link, so you might have 5 opportunities to misspell the link. In our case, or in the case of using an include file, you only have to update it in one spot, so there's one chance for a mistake. And also, if you do make a mistake, you only have to update it in that one file to change it. So let's look at an example of how we can make use of code reuse to our advantage. So what we can do is we have header.html, and this is the header.html file we were just using. And let's say we want to include a style sheet to all the pages. Let's say this was the header file for 5 different pages. We have a style sheet that I've created called includeexample.css with just one simple CSS directive in it. And so what we can do is go back to our include file. And first off, let's just take a look again at what the page looks like. We refresh it. It says content goes here. And when we apply the CSS to it, it should turn red. So if we go ahead and include the CSS file, and we save it, now when we go to view the page again, we can see that it turns red. And if we look at the page source, we can see that that link was added, that link tag was added to the header of our page. Now this would be great if, let's say we had 100 different pages in our website and we wanted to add a style sheet to be used for all of them. We simply would, let me blow this up actually a little bit so you can see it. We would actually simply add this one line to our include file, and it's going to go ahead and update all of our pages. So that's the benefit of code reuse. Now there's an analog to the include statement known as the require statement. And require statements work exactly as the include statement does. It takes the contents of a file that's specified and includes it and processes it in the current script. The only difference is that if it cannot find the file, a fatal error occurs that halts the execution of the script wherever the require statement that caused the error happened. And so that's different from the include statement. And the include statement will issue a warning, but it will continue processing the script. Require statements have 2 forms as well, and they both look the same as the include statement. One is with parentheses, one is without, and it's the same format. You use the require statement, and then you simply include the name of the file, or excuse me, the file name that you want to have included. Now, there's a lot of debate in the PHP community as to when to use a require statement versus an include statement. Some say that any file that's absolutely necessary for your web application to run, you should use a require statement, because your application should fail if it doesn't have the necessary parts. On the other hand, with an include statement, because it doesn't have an error a fatal error that halts the execution of the script, there's ways in PHP that we'll learn about later where you can handle the errors, so you can do a more graceful exit instead of just having a fatal error message appear on your screen. And that's actually sort of the convention that I prefer, is to use the include statement rather than the require, because it allows you, if an error does occur, if you can't find the include file, to put out a message that says, we're having trouble with the website right now, as opposed to a very terse PHP message. So let's go back and take a look at our file. let's say, for example, in include example.php, we misspell the name of the header file to include. So if we go and reload this file, we can see that we get a warning. It's basically saying that it couldn't find the file we tried to include, which was called header1.html. But as you can see, it went ahead and it processed the content and continued to process the script and output the content and the footer. So if we actually look at the source, we can see that this up here is, these first couple of lines are HTML generated by PHP describing the error, but then you can see that the content section was output as well as everything that was in footer.html. Now on the other hand, if we were to go back to this file and we were to use a require statement instead, and again we're going to have header1.html as the file, which is an incorrect file. It's not the real file name, so it's going to cause an error. And we go back and browse the page now, all we get is a fatal error. And if you notice, the rest of the file does not get processed. The content does not show and the footer does not show. So actually all we get is all we have in our source is the PHP error message. And so basically what that does is that allows you to, doesn't allow you to be able to handle the error and maybe output something that looks a little nicer than this very terse error that would be confusing to the user. So as always, we kind of talk about coding conventions as they relate to the different things we learn about in a particular lesson. In this course, we're going to have different kinds of include files. We're going to have files that might only include HTML, files that are just PHP code, and files that contain a mixture of both. The convention we're going to use in this course is any include file that just has HTML is going to have an HTML extension. And as you can see in our include files, they were all HTML, and so we have the .html extension. Oops. If a file contains only PHP code, it's going to have a .php extension. And if it contains a mixture of HTML and PHP, it's going to have a .phtml extension. And basically, this is just a convention that you use that makes it easier to understand when you see an include file what's actually contained in the include file. For example, if it has a .php or .phtml extension on it, we know that there's executable PHP code in there. So if we're getting an error in our application, we can know to look in those files to possibly find out the source of an error. Whereas if it's just an include file with .html, assuming we follow the convention of only including HTML in our .html include files, we know that we don't have to look there for PHP errors. The other thing that we use in this course is we always use the non-parentheses version of both the include and require statements. So taking a look actually at how you can use the .phtml and .php extensions for include files, we've created a file called header.php, which is basically outputs the same HTML as included in the original header.html, except it does so using echo statements. So if we go back to our include example.php file, and instead of having header.html, we put header.php, change this back to include, PHP is going to include this new header.php file instead of the HTML file. And if we go back to our browser and we browse include example.php, we can see we get the content as expected. And if we view the page source, we can see that it has both the header information that's in the new header.php, the content in our main page, and then the content of the footer.html file. Actually, let me blow that up a little bit for you. So this is the header.php output. The other option is we can use a .phtml file. So I've created a header.phtml file to replace, again, header.html. And in this case, it's a combination of HTML code with some PHP code intermixed. This is not a particularly useful example, but it's just to illustrate the point of having PHP intermingled with HTML in an include file. It's just a simple echo statement that echoes the name of the file to include in the title tag. So if we go back to includeexample.php, we change this to PHTML and run the page, reload the page, we should get the same thing. And it turns out we do. And if we go and look at the page source, everything is as expected, with the header information now being drawn from header.phTML file as opposed to header.html file. So now we're going to talk about the exciting, what I think is the most exciting part of this lesson and the course is talk about the web application we introduced in our very first lesson. It's a mock store web application, and today we're going to start building up that web application, and we're going to make use of the include statement that we learned about today. Basically, our web application we're going to be building up, we're going to store it in the directory intro to PHP / web_app. We're going to store it in that directory, which is under the document root. And this is different from storing it in like lecture_8, for example, as we've been doing for the other code examples. So we're going to keep it separate. The other thing that we're going to do is every time we update the web app, we're going to add a new directory called version x.x into this folder right here, where x.x represents a new version number, a major and minor version number. Something like 1.0, 2.0, 2.1. And when we do that, we're actually going to copy the entire contents of the whole previous version into the new versions folder, and then update the files accordingly. So anything like images, CSS files, anything that would be common to all the different versions, we're still going to copy them over, and the reason for that is it makes it easier as far as the directory structure. We could actually have a common, for example, images folder and reference that in each of the different versions. But for the sake of keeping things simple, we're going to recopy everything each time we create a new version. So in version 1.0 for our app, it's just a simple HTML website. And we're going to show you that in a minute. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use include statements to make the website template-based, to take advantage of having common HTML that's common to multiple pages in the website, and placing it in one include file. So when we make changes, we only have to make changes in one spot, and that's going to be version 2.0. The other thing we're going to do is in version 2.1, we're going to create a variable in each PHP page that is going to allow us to add a custom title tag to each page. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to open up the files for version 1.0. So let me close all of these. And before we get into the code for that, let's take a look at what it looks like. So we have a web app directory that we've created in the intro to PHP directory. And we go to version 1.0. And the main page for our web app is going to be called store.html, or eventually store.php. And the reason it's not called index.php or index.html, which is the common case for the default file in a directory, is because then we wouldn't get to see this directory listing right here, because Apache is configured by default in XAMPP to automatically show index.html or index.php. And because for the purposes of teaching, we want to be able to individually access the different files. We want to be able to see this directory structure. I've created the main file to be called something other than index.html, in this case store.html. So if we click on this, this is what our basic store looks like at first. Welcome to the store web application, and basically it's got a header section where eventually we'll put a logo and some other things. It's got content section, and it's got a footer, which you commonly see in many websites or most websites, with a copyright statement, a link to the home page. And the store, in this case, sells a couple of different items, and right here you can click on the different items that are available. and you'll be able to see information about the item. You'll have the name, the item number, the price, an image about it, and a description. And right now, in this basic version, we have just three products. Now, if we go and look at the code for this, this whole website was just coded in pure HTML, so just flat HTML. So every page, there's no PHP in any of the pages. They all have .html extensions. All the links to the different pages are .html links, and this is sort of what the entirety of the web pages look like. Unfortunately, you can't see all of the whole page at once on this screen, but when you're able to download the source code for this, you'll be able to browse through the main file. And what you'll be able to see is that this is the store homepage, and then each item or each product in the store, we've created a page called item dash, then the item number. So for example, this one is called item dash 1001.html. So for each item page, we've created, or for each item we've created our own HTML page. And what you can notice by looking at the website is that when we go to the different item pages and the home page, a lot of the content, or a lot of what you see is the same. The header's the same on all the pages, the footer's the same on all the pages. So we can make use of include files to help us out with that. So if we go, now we're going to look at version 2, which is going to use the include files. Just load up the pages here in the browser and the PS Pad. And browse back to version 2.0. And now we can see that in this case, because we're going to be using include files, they're going to be each of the pages are going to be PHP pages. And as you can see, we have a PHP page created for each item. Item number 1001, 2001, and 3001. And the main page is called store.php. And this website is going to look exactly the same as it did before. However, we're going to make use of include files. So what we can do is if we go back and look at the new store.php page, we can see at the very beginning here we have an include statement. And that's going to include a file called header.html, which basically is the everything before the content section of the web page has been extracted into header.html. And this is also, by the way, this is a relative link, and so we're storing all of our all of our include files in a file called includes, and so this is how we reference that. Basically says from the current directory we go into the includes folder and load header.html. Now if we look at header.html, this is simply the HTML that's common to the beginning of all of the pages in our website placed in one page, in one file, and as you can see it sort of ends where the content begins. Likewise, you can see at the bottom we have a include statement that says include footer.html, and if we go and look at footer.html, it basically starts where the content, it outputs all the HTML from where the content ends all the way to the closing HTML tag. And everything in between, it's hard, you can't see all of it on the screen at the same time, but everything between the first include statement and the footer include statement is the content of the page. So this is actually the content of our store homepage. Now we've done the same thing for each of the different items. So for example, item 1001.php, we include the same header file, we include the same footer file, and then we just have the HTML that describes how to HTML that outputs information about the product that we're going to be using. Excuse me, about the product that the page is showing. And we have that for each of the 3 different pages. So this is how we make use of include files so that if we wanted to make one change to header.html, it would show up on all the different pages. So for example, right now we have sort of this placeholder for store name, just a generic placeholder. What we can do is we can update the header.html file with the name of our store. We give it some name of our choosing, and it's going to update all the different pages on our website. And that's an example of code reuse. So let's go to header.html, and this section, there's a table layout. This website uses a table layout, and in the table called with the ID header is where we have the store's name. So we're going to replace the placeholder store name with the name of the store. So for example, we're going to call it educator.com store. And when we save it and go back and look at our web application and reload the page, now we've updated the title, and it's going to update, or we've updated the name of the store, and it's going to update the name on every single page. So as you can see, when we go to all the different pages, they all now have a newly updated title. Now, one thing that you may have noticed is that in the header.html include file, it has, in the title tag, it has store web app as the title. So every page in our website right now that we go to, if you can see up here, is titled store web app. So like at the beginning, at the tab at the top of your browser that shows the name of the page, right now that outputs what's in the title tag, they all say the same thing right now, which is okay. For the first home page, it makes sense, store web app, but for each additional page, we might want to have something where the name of the page is, for example, the name of the item. Right now, because they all use the same header.html file, they all are going to have store web app output as their title in the browser. So we're going to move on to the next version where we're going to change that functionality. Close all these. Let me load up the files from version 2.1. And let's take a look at what 2.1 is going to look like. So we go to version 2.1, click on store.php. Now this name hasn't been changed because we haven't updated it in this new version, but we could update that just as we had before. And you can see for the home page it says store web app as the title of the page, and now for each of the individual product pages, it actually lists the product name as the title in your web browser. And you may or may not be able to see that, but if you run the example at home, you'll be able to see in the tab or at the top of your web browser that each page has its own name that it's been given as a title. So we have the LCD television title and the baseball bat title. Now, how do we accomplish that? Well, let's look at, for example, item 101.php, which is the 100% cotton t-shirt. What we can do is at the beginning of the PHP file, before we include the header, we can define a variable called title, which is what we will want to set as the title of the web page in the title tag. Now, because the title tag is included in our is contained in our include file, we're going to have code within the include file that's going to be able to take this variable, extract the title from it, and output it. So what that means is that our include file is going to have to change to a file that contains PHP code and HTML. So we're going to create a new header file called header.phtml, which means it contains both PHP and HTML. And if we take a look at that, it turns out that the entire file is the same, except in the title tag, instead of having the name store web app hard-coded into the title, we have a PHP echo statement that simply echoes the output of the variable title, which we had set in the beginning of our script. Now, if we had, and one thing that's important here is that title has to be defined or declared before the include statement. If we had defined it down here on this line instead, it's not going to work because the include file won't know about it yet. Because PHP sort of processes things from the top to the bottom, it only knows about variables. When it reaches the include statement, it only knows the variables that were declared previously in the file. So if we instead had moved it down here, the include file is not going to know about it. And if we go back and look at our PHP page for the t-shirt, you'll see actually that what it does is it outputs an error as the title of the web page, because PHP doesn't know about that variable. It says there's an undefined variable. So that's one thing that's very important, is where you define the variable in your file. And so by using that, creating a title variable before we go to the include header.phtml statement, we can create a custom title for each of our web pages. And if we look at item 2001, we can see we have a 42-inch LCD television as the title. For item 3001, we use baseball bat. And so what that does is allows us to have, again, a custom title. So that sort of ends what we're going to do with the web application today. It's sort of a first start, and we went from a basic plain HTML website to a sort of a template-based website where we learned how to use code reuse, and also we're able to interact with some variables within the include files. So now I just want to talk about the homework challenge for this lesson. Basically, I'm going to kind of have you mimic some of the things that we did in the lesson today. I'm going to have you create a web page containing both a header, a footer, and a content section. Now the header could be anything that you want. It could be a logo. It could be something at the top of the page that's the name of, let's say, your store that you're defining. The footer can contain something like a copyright notice. And create the file in the lecture 8_8 folder of intro.php. And then what I want you to do is do what we did here, which is extract out the parts of the file that would be common to multiple web pages on that website. So the header would be, for example, the name of the store would be common to all of your web pages. You're going to extract that out to a file called header.html. You're going to extract out the footer content to footer.html, and then create a new PHP version of your web page that uses the include statements for the header.html and footer.html, and has the content included in the middle. And when you view the new PHP page in your web browser, you should be able to verify, if everything is done correctly, that the HTML source code of the PHP generated by the PHP page is the same as that of your original .html web page. Then go ahead and create two other PHP web pages using the same format of a header, an include for the header, some content, and an include statement for the footer. And then what I want you to do is go ahead to the header file, header.html, and make a change. In this case, add a logo of some kind. Using an image tag, you can add a logo, and when you make the change to header.html and you go ahead and view all of the other pages, you should see that the logo updates on all of the different pages. And that demonstrates how the importance of code reuse in include files. We're using the same code in multiple places, so we only have to update it in one spot. Then, just to get a little experience with the differences between require and include, we're going to have you make the mistake of renaming the header file in one of your include statements so you can see the warning it generates, and you can see how it continues processing the file. And then we're going to have you change it, that include statement, to a require statement to see how that causes a fatal error that halts the execution of the script. And you can see the difference between the two, and that's a way to sort of see them in action. So that ends today's lecture. Thank you for watching educator.com, and look forward to seeing you next time.